5 minutes. I'm going to try to make this video in 5 minutes. The main thing is that what I wanted to talk about is ridiculous choices. It comes down to the question of what is a ridiculous choice? What is a ridiculous belief? What is ridiculousness itself? You know, I think it's a cultural thing. And people have to judge things from a cultural centric perspective. What's ridiculous? You know, let me talk for a moment. Squirrels. Squirrels don't determine whether things are ridiculous or not. They don't look at what another animal does and determine if it's ridiculous. But yet we may think squirrels are ridiculous. I look at squirrels, sometimes they'll dash out across the street, running, and then they'll change and then decide to turn around. Where if they had just kept going, they'd be okay. But when the squirrel stops right in the middle of the street where the traffic is coming and decides to turn around, he gets run over by a car. You know, I saw the aftermath once. I didn't actually see the moment the squirrel was run over, but like a second later, after the squirrel was flattened, the back part of him was flattened. He was still alive, actually. And he was crawling with his front feet only. He looked rather pathetic, and I felt so bad for him. I didn't know what to do. You know, and I was almost like, I was almost in tears at that moment. Me and this woman, she was driving her SUV, and she stopped. She didn't hit the squirrel, but she saw what happened, and she stopped, and she felt bad. We said, what should we do? What should we, you know? I think we both were like perplexed. I didn't know what to do. And the squirrel, eventually, I wanted to do something to help the squirrel. I kind of approached the squirrel, like, you know, without giving it much thought. And the squirrel actually kind of came at me aggressively a little bit, even though he couldn't do much of anything because he could only walk with his front legs. His back legs had been flattened completely by the car. But then eventually he sort of, I guess, decided, he or she, I don't know, I'm assuming it's a he, crawled under these bushes, I guess to just die, because I know it was going to die. If his back legs, if his back half of his body was crushed, that means all the internal organs had to be squished up together. And eventually that squirrel was going to die, probably within maybe the next few minutes or so. Because I'm sure he was, you know, that was a fatal, mortal wound or injury to that squirrel. But one could look at that, and my reaction as being ridiculous. Why did I care about a squirrel? I mean, what is a squirrel? You know, when you think about it, they're rodents, okay? There's one newspaper article said, all that squirrels are nothing but rats with good public relations. You know, thanks to Disney and all their stuff, squirrels are kind of seen as the cute little cuddly things because they have nice bushy tails and whatnot. You know, my reaction had to be ridiculous, didn't it? It was ridiculous that I cared about this little rodent, that I had feelings, that I even felt pain for that animal. But I don't think that was ridiculous. But some people would swear up and down that's ridiculous. They would say that that reaction was irrational. And sometimes I just wonder, what do we call irrational? Who decides that? You know, there's a sort of culture of thought about that. You know, when I say culture, I don't mean like black culture or something like that. I just mean like a kind of, there are groups that think a certain way. They have a certain worldview. The animals are just things. They don't count. They're just, you know, what do you call it? They're just almost like robots. They're automatons. They don't count. They don't have feelings. They don't, you know, we shouldn't feel anything for them. Because that's, you know, that's just being silly. It's being silly to care about a squirrel. And maybe it is. But I don't think so. And I think it would be hard for somebody to get me to think different about that. To think that it was silly to care about animals. You know, makes me think of some joke. Let me be morbid for a moment. Why did the squirrel cross the road? He didn't. Because he got ran over by a car. That's terrible. But I still care about animals. I can make morbid jokes about it and still, you know, be very caring. But I just wonder, when people run around saying things are ridiculous, what exactly is it? I mean, where is the logical issue involved in that? It just seems more like a sort of, if it were a thing having to do with my own, black culture, I would say it's an ethnocentric. But it's not. It's a something no-centric issue involved in there, a kind of philosophy-centric or worldview-centric judgment involved. It's not a matter of logic. Things being ridiculous depends. I come from a culture where we eat, pig intestines. And some people would think that's silly. Until I went to Spain and discovered that they do the same thing. Not chitlins, but something else, the stomach of the pig. Because I had this as part of the tapas at this one place in Madrid. And, in Mexico, they'll have the beef chitlins. And I get to thinking, some people say, that's ridiculous, those people eat that stuff. How could they eat that? That's ridiculous. So I think holding a particular philosophical position, certain religious position, whatever, I guess it's all ridiculous depending on which position you happen to be. Wherever you are, you're judging it to be ridiculous. Not because it's logical, but because you happen to have landed on a certain position. And from that position, you judge all things contrary to your position to be ridiculous. So that's something to think about when we use words like ridiculous. What exactly do we mean by ridiculous?